Yeah, say it again louder.
And like more enthusiastically.
Well, I was saying,
Like less hungover.
okay. Okay, I was not prepared for this. Humanism is doing good without God, and our agenda is to educate ourselves to become better people.
All right, so let's talk about Pride. Pride is our episode this month, so happy Pride, everyone. Pride started in 1969 with the Stonewall riots. So I don't know if you guys know anything about Stonewall, but it happened because of police raids that were going on at the time. So police were going into bars, arresting people, and then they would march them out to the police vans outside, and the newspapers would be there. They'd take pictures and publish it in the news the next day. So they were essentially shaming people, outing them, putting them in jail. So there was one night in 1969 where the queer community decided they had had enough. So from what I read about Stonewall, it's that the raid happened at a time that wasn't expected. So these raids didn't always happen unexpectedly. Like sometimes, usually the bar owners knew that the raid would happen before the bars got really busy so that they could have their business and that sort of thing. But this time they didn't really give any notice, and they just came in and just started arresting people, and the queer people decided to fight back. So trans people, drag queens were being loaded into cop cars, and they decided to start shouting at the police, and they threw stuff at the police, and they were fighting back, and then other bars kind of joined in the fight. And then the next night, there were thousands of people that came to Stonewall, the bar, and they were rioting again, and they were in the streets and really trying to get notice and get rights and all of that stuff. So the next year, on the anniversary of the Stonewall riot, they decided to have a march in the streets, and that's kind of where the Pride Parade started, and what we know now as the Pride Parade.
Was it originally just the queer community riding, or did the people from the other bars that came to help out, was that people both in and outside of the queer community that was rallying?
I'm not sure. I think that it was majority queer people, but then I know that I read some other people that were just sort of allies that came out.
Okay. And was ally kind of like, was that even a term back then? Or?
No.
No?
I doubt it.
So just good-hearted people, you know.
That's definitely a modern term, I think.
Yeah, well, speaking of terms, I think we have some terms we want to
Yes.
define.
I have a crash course on terminology for all of you people out there who don't really know every term we're going to use. Yeah. All right. So first one is LGBT. So it's an acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Now the term is much longer. So I think it's like LGBTQIA2 plus. Yeah. So there's too many letters now. I think we got a little carried away with ourselves, but we do want to include all of the sexualities and the diversity and the spectrum and all of that. For the use of this podcast, we're just going to use LGBT just because it's shorter, easier to say. We also have straight or hetero. So that's just people that consider themselves to be heterosexual people. So they identify as heterosexual. Then we have queer. So queer has two kinds of terms. One could be to refer to the LGBT community as a whole, or it's also a word that has been reclaimed because it used to be a really bad word to use the word queer, but a lot of people in the LGBT community have reclaimed it and decided that it is a word that it's like an anti-label. So if somebody wants to be a part of the community or is a part of the LGBT community and they don't really fit into one category, they can decide that they're just queer or they don't want to label themselves. So
like
they decide
if
they're
you're
just
asexual queer. or you know, does that also fit into the LGBTQ?
Yes.
It does? Okay.
Yeah, so there's like asexual, pansexual, intersex, two-spirit, like there's tons of different ones. Definitely go research. There's lots of stuff out there.
Is it pretty much anything that isn't heterosexual, or are there cutoffs like within that? So are there certain definitions that would be excluded from that? Or do you think queer could just be defined as anything that is not rigidly defined within the heterosexual framework? Oh, so I'm saying, so is it pretty much just like you are either like straight and or heterosexual, or
Everything else.
anything else. Like I'm wondering why there's such a specific, definition of all of the different types. That leads me to believe that there are certain types that wouldn't be included under the definition. Otherwise, why wouldn't you just say anything that isn't heterosexual?
I think people want to also have some specificity in
Okay.
the definition. So I would assume like an intersex person might be a different label than maybe asexual, and so there's let's call it different niches of
Okay.
different sexualities or non-heterosexual labels that.
But
Has-
anyone can be included in that.
I would assume so. I think the term is trying to be as inclusive and kind of wrap itself around a lot of these other more niche labels that have popped up over the years. So to me, I've always viewed queer as kind of being very all-encompassing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of organizations that kind of use the word queer as well to kind of say it kind of includes everything.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so that was queer. We also have gay. So gay can mean two things again. So it can mean a male attracted to a male. It can also be another word that we use as an encompassing word. So it just means the whole community. Yeah. There's also transgender. So individuals who don't identify with their assigned sex at birth. So they're born as male or female. They don't identify that way, and therefore they possibly become another gender. They can make that decision on their own.
What is the difference between transsexual and transgender?
Transsexual, I think, was a term that was sort of used to identify transgender people and drag queens. So drag queens are people that dress up as the opposite gender for performance and for art.
Yeah.
And it was an older term that was used to encompass both of those, but transgender people are like they're their own set of people, whereas drag queens are doing something completely different.
But they're not mutually exclusive. So you can be a drag queen who is also transgender.
Yes.
Okay. But being a drag queen doesn't necessarily mean that you're transgender and vice
Yes.
versa.
Yeah.
That's news to me. I learned something new.
Because it's really not acceptable anymore to use the word transsexual.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What if someone wants to identify as transsexual?
I think that would be up to the person because we have reclaimed so many words. A lot of people say they have reclaimed the word faggot, and I don't agree that we've reclaimed it, but if they believe that they've reclaimed it, then I would give them permission to use that word.
And that's how words get reclaimed.
Yeah.
Right? Presumably, it's not like everyone just suddenly agrees that this word is reclaimed. It's by people who are claiming it's reclaimed before the majority of people agree with them, and then it's a slow process toward the majority ending up agreeing with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and over time, I mean, it loses its power, right? It's or its negative association. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if a person would like to use that word, that is their choice, but they would have to be in the position of they are that person. So if somebody is transgender, they want to use the word transsexual, and I think there are people who do use that word.
Okay.
But I would never use it, and it would be up to them.
Is this are these rules written down somewhere, or is it a well prescribed to thing within the queer community, or is it more like everyone has their own kind of definitions?
It's actually in the gay agenda.
Oh, okay. that's the other podcast.
Have you not read the gay agenda? You did not prepare well for
No,
today.
Yeah.
No, it's more a cultural thing that people just decide on. It's like the N-word, we know not to use the word as a cultural decision, right? So, yeah.
And do you think it's similar in Canada and US and other places that would have a very, the communities in those countries would have a very similar, actually that's a different question, sorry to be rambled, but would you say that the gay community is a global community, or is it more specific to individual countries?
Well, I think each country definitely is in different stages of acceptance, right?
Okay.
So definitely in North American, European countries, I think we might have very similar terms and similar definitions and similar segmentations, but
Okay.
I think definitely in other countries, the segmentation is much more limited, and it's kind of just either good or bad.
Okay.
That's basically their
Yeah.
definition.
I feel like it also still depends where you are in North America or where you are in Europe.
Sure, like Texas or something.
Like if you think of further south, in the Bible Belt, it's probably not the same kind of community as up here.
And I would hate to say that all gay communities around the world are the same. Like, I think that we are similar, but
Right.
it definitely, like, you know, every community around the world is different. So,
Okay.
yeah, they may have their own social norms.
Okay.
All right, next word, we have cisgender. This is kind of a new concept that's come up recently. So it's about if somebody identifies with their assigned sex at birth. So I was born a woman, I identify as a woman, I am a cisgender person. Talking about the closet or coming out is another term. It's the process of acknowledging your sexuality. So if somebody's gay, they want to come out of the closet, that sort of thing. The closet is where you hide and don't tell your sexuality, and coming out is being open about it. Another term is heteronormativity, and this is a new one as well. It's the belief that heterosexuality is the only norm or orientation. So, for example, if I tell somebody I'm getting married and they ask me what my husband's name is, that would be heteronormativity, assuming that I am marrying a man, and that is the only gender that I could be marrying because I am a woman.
Is that what that's assuming, or could it perhaps be just a mistake? Like, I know that I could perhaps make that mistake by asking somebody that, but I don't think I would say I assume that that's the only orientation.
But by assuming it with me, like it's assuming it that I am, right? And being shocked when I'm not. So I don't know how to explain it very well. I don't know if you want to tackle that.
Well, I think, I mean, if I were to, I understand like why obviously certain people will make assumptions. I think it's clear the LGBT community is a smaller fraction compared to everyone else.
So just
like
statistically.
There's a statistical likelihood that you are correct if you make an assumption. But I think generally now a lot of people are starting to become a little bit more aware that that's not a 100% chance that you will get it correct. So a lot of the guidance now is always not to try to make assumptions. I understand why people do make certain assumptions, but I think generally the guidance now is really try not to make an assumption. And
So does heteronormativity mean that you think that it is the only orientation, or is it more just like an inclination to make that assumption as normal? So it's like you think, well, it's normal to be this way, therefore I make that assumption, but without making the separate claim that you think it's the only orientation, or does heteronormativity mean specifically you do think there's only the one option? And that's the distinction I'm trying to make. So I'm trying to think when is it appropriate to say something like someone that was being heteronormative, like, is it just somebody assuming that it's normal, or only thinking within, I guess, that air quotes normal framework for relationships, or is it more directly what you said about how it's only if you think that's the only orientation?
I think it's more assumptions based on our society's idea that boys wear blue and girls wear pink, and girls marry boys and boys marry girls, and like there's only this one concept that we have.
Like, not on average, but like that is the way that it is, and your daughter. So I guess if I said no, your daughter cannot play with Tonka trucks, that would be a good example of heteronormativity. Yeah. But where if I said, oh, I got your daughter a Barbie, for her birthday, that wouldn't necessarily be heteronormativity, because you're not saying that she can't play with a Tonka truck. You just assumed that she would want the Barbie, or is that also heteronormativity?
I think that's also heteronormativity. I think it's on a scale. Like the one is extreme, whereas the other one is more like playing into a heteronormative culture.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would classify it as heteronormative as well. I mean, I know kids that are boys that play with trucks and also play with dolls, but
Yeah.
to assume that you're giving a gift, you're just gonna give trucks is the only thing that this boy wants.
But when you walk into a toy store, the fact that there's a boys section and a girls section, and the boys section is blue and the girls section is pink.
That's heteronormative.
Heteronormative culture, I would say, yeah.
Is that interpreted within the queer community as being like a negative thing? In all cases, or is it more like only the extreme cases are deemed to be a negative?
I think we would like to change all cases.
Okay.
Yeah, so that people feel more comfortable, so that, boys feel more comfortable playing with dolls and it's not a negative consequence.
Yeah, I think it's just really just trying to change the culture a little bit in terms of trying to not
Be so
classify.
rigid.
Yeah, be so rigid. Put boys in this category of toys, for example, or clothing and whatever other items, and put girls in a different category. I think it's just trying to create a culture where boys and girls can pick whatever they want
Without feeling any pressure.
without feeling pressure, without feeling guilt.
Same goes for when we're talking about pride, about what men and women choosing their orientations or their genders to make it not be this negative consequence in society.
So we have a few discussion questions.
Or did we have other terms?
That's all the terms I got.
Oh, sorry.
We're all good. You now know everything you need to know about any word we're going to say. Hopefully.
Yeah, so we have a few discussion questions that we might talk about today. I think one of the first questions that we want to maybe discuss is there's a pride parade that usually happens around this time of the year, and there's a question on why do we even need a pride parade? That's the question on the table right now. I would assume there's a certain group of people that might think having a straight parade would make sense, but
You laugh, but people
do.
on Facebook,
Yeah.
they come up with this idea that they need a straight parade.
Well, if they wanted one, I don't think I would stop them, but I definitely would say there's different needs. I mean, just to say
Just
that.
wouldn't know what a straight parade would consist of.
Oh,
A bunch
it's
of
kind of
people walking
like Black Lives Matter, but so do all lives. Like
Oh boy.
like obviously there's very different needs.
But I think the one thought I always have when someone says that isn't. I mean, yes, there might be a parade or maybe like a Pride Week that kind of celebrates all this, but every other day it's a kind of a celebration of that's why it goes back to heteronormative conversations, because every other day it's kind of a straight day.
A straight parade would be like having an atheist parade. Where it's kind of like the absence of something that's
No, I disagree.
unique.
No, I know what you're getting at, but I feel like atheism is stigmatized within the society. So if we're asking why do we have a pride parade, and if it's to reduce that stigmatization, then I think actually an atheist parade would be a better example of the type of parade that the pride parade is.
I was thinking more of like celebrating something, like how people have like, Greek fest and like food fest, you're celebrating something.
So the one thought I had as well is kind of thinking back to why the Pride Parade even existed. And the Pride Parade was pretty political, like back when it just first started. LGBT people did not have any rights, they weren't protected classes. And having the parade was a form of protest, was a form of political action. And it's kind of morphed into something else nowadays, but really the start of the parade was really around creating a political action to fight for their rights and try to change society. So having this parade definitely had a meaning to a lot of people, and it's kind of evolved over time, but I think that it's good to kind of understand why the parade even started in the first place, and it all relates back to what you talked about, Sherry, around starting with Stonewall, LGBT people demanding rights, and it kind of just started from there and evolved over time to something a little bit more fun, let's call it.
It's interesting because the community can get so polarized sometimes because people are very passionate about the fact that the Pride Parade started as a riot. So people are now saying they don't like the way the parade is now because it's so corporate and it's so manufactured, and we need to have our own separate parade that is a riot and keep fighting for those rights and that sort of thing. People can get so passionate
I
about
don't
it.
think I agree with riots and getting messages across. Like,
I don't know if that would be effective. Maybe it would just increase the polarization within the community.
yeah, I understand the idea that it's very commercial now, and I think a parade is still kind of has that function of reducing stigma and showing that's like a welcome community. So I think as of right now, it still serves that function. But I guess my question is if you think that like in the future, a pride parade will still be necessary,
I actually, personally, I think it's a good thing it's starting to become commercial, but that's just, again, my personal opinion, but primarily because it shows a evolution of what the parade is. And this action was activism in the beginning, and over time, as we start gaining acceptance, I mean, money speaks a lot of words, and as corporations kind of get in on the parade, and it continues to at least give the image of acceptance in the community, I think there's a lot of benefit. And we now have a generation of kids who know about the parade, don't view the parade as something negative, and I think that's a good thing. We're kind of moving towards a direction towards acceptance, and I know definitely there's still a long ways to go, but to me, I kind of view it as a positive thing that it is starting to, you have all these companies funding parades and showing employees, for example, that it is accepted, you can be who you are, and obviously you can do business with them because that's really what they're trying to advertise. But they want to create an environment and trying to also show that whoever you are, they're willing to kind of accept your business. And I think we recently had issues in the US around
The bakery.
Bakeries, right? Not providing services. And I think even having any corporation kind of show this, having corporations participate in the Pride Parade really sends a strong message to employees that LGBT people are accepted, and any discrimination is definitely unacceptable and definitely grounds for losing your job. And I think setting these expectations in the market and in the community sends a really powerful message to a lot of people who may be bigoted and may not want to provide LGBT people with rights.
Yeah, it kind of puts the pressure on those bigoted people, where suddenly they start to feel that those negative social consequences for being bigoted, as opposed to, it's like flipping the coin, instead of people of the LGBT community feeling the pressure societally for being the way that they are, or now the pressure's on the bigoted people.
Yeah, and I think LGBT people are a small fraction of the whole population. And really at the end of the day, when you look at how rights are given, how acceptance is given, you need the mass of people. You need the acceptance of the overall community, and LGBT people need allies. And to me, the parade, corporate sponsorships, these are just actions that continue to build this network of allies that will eventually help protect LGBT rights, because at the end of the day, you do need a pretty large mass of people to support and protect LGBT rights.
And there have been some cases recently of organizations coming to the aid of LGBT people. So last year in Texas, they passed a bathroom bill where you're only allowed to go to the bathroom that is of your indicated sex on your birth certificate. So trans people would not be allowed to go to the bathroom of their choice. And a whole bunch of organizations spoke out against it. I think it was about 80 organizations put pressure on the Texas government to repeal that law. And the NCAA basketball organization said, we're not going to have our tournament there unless you guys change this.
Mhm.
And it changed everything. Like it was great support, and it was, monumental for the LGBT movement. However, to play the devil's advocate to that is that corporations now are making a lot of money off of Pride. So you go to so many websites of stores like, Target has a Pride line. So they're making all these Pride merchandise and they're making money off of it now. So they're making money off of our LGBT struggles, right? So that's where you get that issue of corporations coming into the parade, selling their merch, and then getting money off of something that was hugely oppressive.
I feel like that's done in a lot of situations though. Same with like the pink ribbon. There's a whole documentary, Pink Ribbon Incorporation, saying that a lot of money doesn't actually go to cancer research. And I would say a lot of like, this bag is green and like green products, like all that money also doesn't go to those initiatives. So I think that's just going to be something that corporations continue to do. And it's unfortunate, but I think as long as they're still kind of putting some of the money where their mouth is, it's still the best that we can make.
Yeah, personally, I guess also devil's advocate that position. But I do think this is a position I actually hold. I don't see any problem with corporations, making money so long, because I'm more of a utilitarian, so long as the net benefit is positive. I'm not somebody who would personally bother too much with the ethics of it. Like say, well, I want my solution to happen only in the most ethical of possible ways. Like I personally would throw my lot in with the first solution that seemed legitimate, regardless of if someone else actually benefits from it. And honestly, personally, I think I would rather see the queer community thrive and corporations make money than only the first, because I see that as two benefits, and I'd just be personally less inclined to draw a negative ethical connection between how that money is being generated, unless it was negatively affecting the Pride movement.
Yeah, and definitely the example of corporations fighting back on the bathroom bill. I mean that is a really good sign. I mean, like, money speaks volume in politics, unfortunately, and I think it's quite, if we can attack the problem in multiple ways through activism, through corporations. I mean, this is perfect, because we're pushing our society forwards in the direction we want it to move towards.
As long as we hold those organizations accountable.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think
I
that we
think
can
I think
make that.
there's definitely, you can create a situation where it is a win-win, and yes, there's corporations that profit from Pride, but certain corporations will also give back as well. So I noticed your Apple Pride band there. A portion of those proceeds do go to LGBT causes. So I think there's ways where both sides can essentially benefit.
But no free riders is kind of what I'm getting from that. So no making money off of the community if you don't provide some kind of benefit to the community as well.
I think that what we talk about donating proceeds to the community is one thing, but also having a inclusive environment. I think that's important. So I think if a corporation is going to participate in the Pride Parade or sell Pride merchandise, then they have to practice what they preach, right? They have to be able to have that inclusive environment, because otherwise you're profiting off of our struggles, our oppression. I don't think that's right.
Is there an example of a corporation that is benefiting from Pride but don't necessarily help the community?
Potentially like offshore, like international companies that are producing a lot of little pride flags and pride bracelets and probably don't have an inclusive environment.
A lot of that stuff comes from China.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't know how the movement's there, but I wasn't picturing a really big community there.
Yeah, it's not great in China.
Yes.
No.
What's the benefit of going after those companies though? I guess there's there's an ethic there. I don't understand, like, personally, I don't understand that ethic. If you why do you feel that that's an important ethic?
I just don't think that we should support companies that that practice discrimination or that practice.
Well, that's different. I'm not assuming a corporation is doing some kind of a negative against the community. I'm just thinking more like of a neutral company.
But she's saying that there is really no neutral. Either you are inclusive or you're not inclusive. You don't need to give money. As long as you're inclusive, you're in the good books.
Okay, so I can agree that it's bad that the company wouldn't be inclusive and that we would want to pressure all companies to be inclusive. I don't understand why, the added layer of, making money off of pride increases the negative of not being inclusive. I think that the issue is that they aren't inclusive and we need them to become inclusive. But I don't think it necessarily makes it worse on my view to not be inclusive and to make money. Like I guess it's hypocritical, but I guess I would care more about trying to promote the gay community than I would about chasing after all of these peripheral, ethical concerns, unless you felt there was a direct connection, which I can imagine there could be.
I think we might have to also limit the scope. I can see the example of maybe offshore manufacturing. Okay, maybe that there's some ethical dilemmas there. I think participants in the parade, there's a pretty high likelihood they're all pretty inclusive. But when it comes to these, going back to the example of offshore manufacturing, I think this is where having activism take a role in validating the source of the components, source of manufacturing, and whether the manufacturer is compliant with our view of how human rights should actually be provided to people and employees. I think that's where activism might take a place. And going back to, there's a lot of corporations will validate their supply chain for various issues, either child slavery, things like that. But I don't know to what extent people would validate. If they were manufacturing something related to pride, would they actually validate that the manufacturer's corporate policy is inclusive? I think that's a good point in terms of I haven't seen any discussion around validating that. Yeah. I've seen discussions around validating manufacturers and sourcing materials from places where there is child slavery, for example. So LGBT inclusiveness, I don't think I've heard of that as kind of being one of the metrics that's measured.
So we're talking a bit about who is allowed to participate in the parade, which gets us down to another very controversial topic, which is police presence in the parades. This year, London has decided that the police can march, but not in uniform. So in London, the police chief made a statement saying that he was disappointed that uniformed officers won't march in the Pride parade, but they can march as ununiformed people.
Can they march as part of the police, like their organization, or just like they're allowed to be but independent or some other organization?
That's a good question.
Because otherwise that'd be really horrible. Like, for example, last year in Toronto where the police weren't allowed, but there's definitely some LGBT people in the police force. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't exclude them from a pride parade.
Well, definitely in Toronto, those police officers are being excluded.
Even the ones
but they can march as long as they're not in uniform.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think there's an allowance for people who are not in uniform, but they're not allowing police officers who are uniform march. Obviously there's working police officers, but they're not marching, obviously.
The rationalization on that is that police have taken a negative role in LGBT communities and continue to, especially people of color, indigenous population, that feel uncomfortable going to pride parades because the police are marching in uniform.
Oh, really?
Are those two separate issues, though, or
I don't know. The thing with that is that we have this interconnectivity, right? So you can't take away your color and your LGBT status. It's all part of one, right?
Everyone's diverse.
Yeah, and the other issue is that people of color who are LGBT are more targeted than just people of color. So people who are trans are often targeted, but also trans women of color are even more targeted than just being trans.
I think that the goal of the parade, there's two main goals of the parade. One is to strategically incorporate the gay community into the grand society and reduce stigmas, reduce, all of that. And the other goal is to provide like an emotional satisfaction to those within the community and emotional protection and all of that. So with the example of police, do we include them? Well, for the one goal, yes, we shouldn't. Sorry, for the first goal of being strategic with accomplishing, general acceptance for the gay community and reducing police brutality and all of that, well, yes, we should include them, because by excluding them, we're only going to further polarize, the divide between the gay community and the police force. But on the other side of things, you would be reducing the emotional satisfaction that those in the parade that some of those in the parade are getting from being in the parade, because now they feel like their enemy is kind of, tainting an environment that was pure to them before. Do you understand the conflict between
and a
those two goals?
safety in the parade, because a lot of people sort of find that safety of, this is where I can finally express myself.
Right.
Yeah. And the complication with the police being in the parade is that there are some people who are police officers who are also gay.
Yeah.
And so by saying that you can't march as a police officer in the parade means you're kind of ignoring their identity.
Because
so
they
it's
also
not
have two cultures, and though for their world, their cultures have blended well.
Mm-hmm. So it's ignoring their identity and saying you can't be comfortable in the parade. We want to make everyone else comfortable. So who gets to be comfortable is the bigger question.
So you would assume that the goal of the parade is to create an environment of comfortability, even if it's at the trade-off or the cost of the effectiveness of the movement and reducing tensions between the police force and the gay community.
But remember I think one of the arguments that activists would give here would be, Pride is a political event. That's the root of it. So
I think
by
it's
causing
both. Why does it have to be one or the other?
Because there are trade-offs, and I'm not saying it has to be one or the other, but I think there are certain circumstances where you end up with having to choose between a trade-off. Like, for the example, do you include the police? By not including the police, the trade-off is, well, now you're increasing the polarization between the police force and the gay community. You're increasing the hostility, and you're kind of burning some bridges toward, holding hands and coming to common ground. But obviously the reason why you would want to exclude them is for the emotional comfort of those in the parade. So you really do, in this case, have to choose to either include the police or not, and there's a trade-off between the emotional comfort of those in the parade and the effectiveness of the movement at reducing hostility between police and the gay community. And
my personal opinion is police should be included, primarily because I totally understand where there is a conflict, but at the end of the day, really creating this safe space, in my opinion, for both parties is ideal.
It's more important?
For me, it's more important. So, I would want to view Pride as a safe space for uniformed police officers if they wanted to participate in the parade to be there. But I also would expect people to send a pretty strong message during the parade about the messages that Black Lives Matter is trying to communicate in terms of queer people of color being targeted disproportionately compared to non-people of color. So I would expect both to have a place in Pride, but I can see why obviously Black Lives Matter really want to send a pretty strong message.
So kind of just like maybe your view would be, you're welcome to the parade, but we're going to make it clear to you that we expect more from our police forces. You gonna say that, or like we want to work with you, but we're not there yet. Like we expect more from you, and we need to keep working on it.
Yeah, I would say that message is pretty clear to the police. There's a lot of pushback to the police during this time. So I think the message is clear, but are we there yet? Obviously not. There's still quite a lot of work to be done, but I don't think this is something that can be solved, overnight.
Yeah.
I think that message is being sent by saying you can march in the parade, but you just can't march in uniform. So until we have the safety and security that you are supposed to provide to us, then you can march in uniform. But until that point, you can't march in uniform.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't mean you can't participate, you just can't participate in that way.
So I guess if that's communicated well, then there doesn't have to be a trade-off. Because I guess the key is just not antagonizing the police force or making them think that it's an us versus them situation where we aren't including you. Because anytime that somebody says you can't sit with us, like the psychological reaction to that is going to be, okay, I didn't want to anyway. Fine. So it's obviously important not to give off that message, perhaps unintentionally.
I think you have to walk it's a very fine line to walk to send that message. Because I know, like, the police chief in London, when he made his statement, said, like, he understands why they're not marching in uniform and that there are issues in the people of color sectors and the, those sorts of things, the indigenous. And it's tough because you've got the police chief and he says he understands it, but then you've got a whole police force. So it's making sure that everyone on the police force understands that this is kind of our way to help enact change.
Mm-hmm. Because I didn't get that.
Mm-hmm.
I never view that way. And the people I've spoken with about it outside of that community, I don't think that those people saw it that way either. So
I thought it was really sad. I was at the Toronto Pride Parade last year, and there was a group of police officers like outside of the parade pathway, kind of being like, "Hey, like, please include us." And they had some posters saying, you can't make a rainbow without blue. Something like that. And it was I thought it was kind of sweet that they had still come to show their support for the Pride Parade even though they weren't invited. I thought it was sweet. Other people may not have thought of it like that. But
yeah, I really don't agree with completely saying you can't join us in the parade. I think that the parade is made to be inclusive, and that all the LGBT community really wants is inclusivity and tolerance. And so to say that we are not tolerant of police officers, we are not including them, is a bit of a hypocrisy in a way. And I think that we need to work with them. We can't pit ourselves against them.
No, you need all the allies you can get, and the last thing you want to do is polarize against people who might otherwise want to be your allies, especially if they're in a position to maybe make a change from within the police force themselves. It's those good members who want to come out who are ultimately going to be spreading the message to the rest of the officers on what's permissible behavior. So
yeah, when you look at the parade, I mean, there's various groups that may not share similar views within the parade, and we never really, we don't have an issue there, obviously, due to the location of where people are placed and things like that. But Pride is the perfect location to not only demonstrate that we can have differing opinions, there definitely is conflict between different groups, but Pride is also an opportunity to share those opposing views and to get the message out about some of these social issues that still need to be tackled, especially people of color.
I think it's
police brutality.
Yeah, I think it's comparable to having churches in the parade. The church has done so much damage to the LGBT people. Some churches still agree and encourage conversion therapy, which is awful. The American Psychological Association has condemned it, and yet we are allowing churches to participate in our parade.
But I think the churches that are in the parade are the ones that aren't doing that things, I would think. I hope.
there's got to be a difference between historical grievances against certain corporations and the current state, because nobody would want to say you were once bad, therefore you will always be deemed as bad. I think that it's a positive so long as they're actually making positive changes and they're no longer that organization that did those things. I would fight against what I think some people have this intuitive reaction to exclude them because of their past behavior. That's just another example, I think, where you have that conflict I was talking about between what's effective for creating a positive change in society and what might be emotionally desirable for those members.
Yeah. But definitely remember the exclusion here is not for past behavior, but ongoing behavior.
Yeah, not completely reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that you could compare that to the police, saying, like, if you looked at each individual church as an individual person, you've got individual churches in the Catholic or Christian faith that are pro-LGBT, and you've got some that aren't. And so, you know, it's about including the people who want to be a part of it and who say we're doing good. And so, like, it's individual members of the police that are saying, we want to do good, we want to do better, we want to help you, that sort of thing. I think that you can compare those two.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, and to me, what better way to change either a community or an organization than to have the people within those community and organizations create the change? Because unfortunately, we're people like to be in their own little tribes, and it's hard to influence them unless you start from inside out within that tribe. I think it's definitely being worked on. There's a lot of pressure for the police to kind of change their stance and change how they behave, but we can only see if that actually occurs.
So talking about policing, I guess we can get into the topic of the Toronto serial killer. We'll take a dark turn here. And people who are targeted, and because we were talking about trans people of color really being targeted by police, but also possibly ignored by police. So did you want to talk about what happened?
Sure. So there was a serial killer that was caught recently in Toronto, and he had been preying on gay men in the community, and gay men had been essentially disappeared, gone. Basically, they were declared missing for a period of time, and the appearance of this whole situation looks like the police literally ignored all the major signs. People start disappearing from the gay community, and there's a view of some people that because these people were gay, they were people of color, that the police pretty much ignored all the major signs that there was a serial killer in the community. And it took a while before this person was actually caught. And so I think there's been some criticism for the Toronto police around their ability to not only find the signs, even though people have reported these people missing. A few people have reported that it seems suspicious that gay men have been disappearing from the community, and especially gay men of color. So this criticism is out there, and I think the police chief said some odd comments around maybe that kind of seemed like he was victim blaming, essentially, for why these people would even essentially hook up with this serial killer. And
it's their promiscuous lifestyle.
Yes. So I think there's a few things that could be tackled in this conversation, but it seemed like, I don't know. I don't know whether this truly is a case where the police completely just ignored these victims because they were gay and because they were people of color.
Is there also a chance because they were male? I feel like police, I don't know if police would respond faster if a woman goes missing than if a man goes missing. I think there's still very different expectations and risks that people view that women experience and that men experience. Mm-hmm. I wonder if that could also be a factor.
Yeah. But basically, it's not helping the Toronto police. Let's put it that way.
It's not.
with accusations of police brutality, and now this, I think it's compiling damning evidence that there's something that needs to be changed in the Toronto police.
And I think this serial killer issue sort of brought to the forefront people in the LGBT community going missing or being murdered that aren't really looked at. Like, trans women are murdered very frequently every year, and it's just ignored. It's not really taken that seriously. Like, people
which
really.
Which is that's another one shows on definition on trans women. Is that
men who become women?
Okay.
Yes. So born male, transition to female. So I know the U.S. had something like 23 or something last year that have been murdered and not solved, not bothered with. I think Canada's a lot better. I think we only had one. However,
that's not solved, or one murder?
One murder, and it is not solved.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there may also be ones that have occurred and haven't resolved.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I don't know the exact statistics.
That is fair.
Yeah. So that community is often ignored because they are kind of the outsiders of our society, that they feel like they're not taken seriously. And I think that happens a lot in our society because the issue with the serial killer is that they target people who are weak in our society. So serial killers go after people who will not be missed, who will not be noticed, that sort of thing. So trans women, people of color, indigenous women, that sort of thing, so that they can get away with it longer. If we look back in time of the Picton case, so Robert Picton, who was murdering and kidnapping indigenous women, and indigenous women are not seen as as important, and they are often forgotten by society and therefore easier to kill. And so he got away with murdering, the numbers are unclear. He was accused of murdering 20. The DNA said 80. I think he admitted to 40 or 50. He confessed to 50. So like
a large number to confess to.
Yeah. So they're targeting these weak populations, and queer people kind of fall into these weak populations. And that's why this Toronto serial killer was able to get away with this, is because the people that he was targeting were people who were closeted. So people who could not talk about it outside of in their lives, and people who were maybe homeless queer youth. That's a big contingent of people who go missing or murdered. And I think it's very sad that the police aren't able to really act on these things.
Was the killer queer himself, or did he have any particular bias against the queer community, or was he just looking to kill and unbiased, and he saw this as an opportunistic way to do what he wanted? Do we know anything?
I have no idea, but I think that the main point here is really the appearance that the police did essentially fail in their job, right? And noticing the pattern until it was too late. And I don't remember how many people he managed to kill. Maybe I think 8 or something like that.
Something like that.
But the criticism is really around not noticing the signs, and even though they were given complaints from the community that there are people missing, but no one really kind of took it seriously.
And the Toronto police were very slow to call it a serial killer, because the queer community was calling it a serial killer way before the police actually admitted it. And I don't know if that's more of a PR thing where you don't want to make the public panic, but like there was reason in the queer community to be concerned. I think a lot of it is a question of whose lives are worthwhile. And
do you think that's at the conscious level within the police force, or do you think it's more of a subconscious thing? I would find it hard to believe that consciously any number of officers in the force would say, I just don't think that queer lives matter. I doubt that would be, or I guess you're saying that that's just kind of, that's what's born out. You can see that must be somewhere in their subconscious.
I don't think it's a conscious action. I personally, I just find it would be hard for me to think of a police officer consciously ignoring these, but I think it's probably a combination of not being aware of their own biases, and not being aware of, I guess, not realizing that they've shaped their reality to really kind of focus on what they believe are the priority victims. But not realizing that if the community is telling you, these people are missing, they're not missing because they've ran away or something. It's they're missing because they actually are missing, and there's a sense of urgency in the community to take action.
Were there like news sources that documented this kind of stuff before it was actually like determined that it was a serial killer? Because I feel like it goes further than just the police. It also goes on what is in the public eye of interest, right? Like if a child goes missing, people respond very quickly. I feel like if a young girl goes missing, they're going to respond much faster than a 50-year-old man. Which is unfortunate, but it's just based on what we see as how we see who is more vulnerable, I guess.
Or just what is news? What does the public pay attention to? So the fact that the news might not report on that is more representative of what the viewership of that news outlet would be interested in reading, right? So that's more of like a societal problem in general. And back to maybe the police's reason for taking so long. I agree that they probably thought it's more likely that within the gay community there would be other reasons they went missing, even if that's not statistically true. I would be inclined to hope that that was more the reason they didn't look into it, and not because they thought, well, yeah, I know they're missing, but I don't value them. You know, I mean, and there could easily be some combination of both factors. But I definitely would like to think, at least, that it was more they thought, oh, well, there must be other reasons they went missing that aren't as serious.
It's still an issue to make that assumption and not determine for yourself.
Oh, of course
right?
it is.
Like it's, I don't think that really excuses
It morally excuses to some extent because intentions matter. You know, so I think there's a huge moral difference between not following it up because they don't care about the person that's missing and not thinking the person's actually missing.
Yeah,
I mean,
think it's pretty clear that the police wouldn't intentionally.
But I'm just saying, I think there's a difference between those two things, and it matters knowing which is the cause or to what degree both causes are at play.
Okay, and then
so that you can address the issue in further in the future. Is that what you're saying? Is knowing what the cause was,
you can address it.
You know, do more training or whatever you need to do.
Yeah. So is it sensitivity training toward the homosexual community, or is it, or the queer community, or is it maybe sensitivity training is not going to do anything because they already love the gay community, you know, but it wasn't the lack of sensitivity that was the problem. It was their biases about the statistics surrounding the likelihood of people in that community going missing, you know. And so if they can know anyone who goes missing is just as likely to be a problem, like that, maybe that's what they should address, like, or add some kind of like a rigid rule for how they are going to follow up, you know, reports. So, you know, I don't care what your own intuitions are about the subject. If you receive a report, the method for following it up is this.
You would think it would be like that already.
Well, obviously not, right?
Yeah. So they have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
So, but I feel like we need to go on to something a little bit more happier.
Yeah.
For sure.
This is getting me down. So apparently, I hear someone's getting married at this table.
Someone's getting married? That's so exciting. I'm getting married.
Oh, wow.
Yay.
So tell us about your wedding.
So I'm getting married in the Pride Parade on the Humanist Association float. It's very exciting.
Woo!
The ceremony will happen as we are moving down the road. So look forward to that. Come on out to that. That's very exciting.
We'll all be there.
It has been crazy to plan because nobody looks at their wedding and says, okay, I need to rent a truck that can handle pulling a bunch of people.
Yeah.
What? I thought that's just common. Everyone does that.
It has been a nightmare to plan. Yeah, but I'm very excited that it's going to happen. And we kind of made it happen, and there's going to be lots of people there and wear all of your colors.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you got your outfit picked, Will?
Not yet. I might exclude blue, though. I haven't decided.
Oh, dear. Let's not go there.
Sorry. I'm just gonna wear my police outfit now.
Okay.
No, I haven't picked it out yet. I'm more of a spontaneous kind of person because I find that, you know, all of the encouragement and excitement kind of boils up before the event, and I like to just let that creativity kind of take me. So
I have been planning my outfit.
Yes.
It's going to be very colorful.
Is your dress finished?
It is finished.
Tell us about your dress. I
I
think the people want to
know. So my dress I got custom made at Sophie's. So I ordered like a white bridesmaid's dress. It's nice and cheap. And then I brought in colorful tulle so that the skirt is going to be like a pride flag almost. Just all the pride colors and stripes. It's beautiful. Very beautiful.
Excited to see it.
Mhm. My shoes are going to be glittery rainbow shoes. I made those.
Cool.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's quite the wedding. It's been interesting to plan for.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to be wearing a colorful jock strap.
Are you?
Oh.
I am so excited for that. That's what I expect from Pride Parades.
That was my second thought, actually, for myself.
No.
Please do.
No, I'm not actually going to do that. But
My wedding is very non-traditional. I'm ready to accept all people who
Alright.
want to wear jock straps.
break the boundaries.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. did we want to get into issues of surrounding weddings of
Well,
LGBT
I mean, did you
people?
run into a few things during your planning?
Sure, I wanted to keep it light, but we can get deep into that.
Yeah, I think we're well past keeping it light. I think.
I guess the reason I think I put heteronormativity into our terminology was because I encountered a lot of that in my planning process. And I encountered a little bit of, I don't want to say anti-gay, but just really uncomfortability with being gay. So I went to one of the conventions that they have, the wedding conventions, where they have a whole bunch of booths set up for different vendors and you can just go around and talk to all the vendors. And I was talking to a florist and they were asking about my wedding, and I mentioned that I'm marrying a woman in the Pride Parade, and their face kind of dropped and they were just not interested in having a conversation with me anymore.
Oh.
And so I was like, okay, I'm not going to have my wedding with you. It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's very different having an LGBT wedding than it would be a hetero wedding. So let's say you were getting married, you wouldn't be thinking about, I need an officiant who is LGBT friendly. I can't get married in a church. I can't have, well, I could, I just need to find somebody who would do that for me. And it's not easy. And other things like when I sign up for vendors often have a form on their website that asks the bride's name and the groom's name. So who do I decide is the groom, or who do I decide is the bride? Yeah, so there's been a lot of weird things that you kind of have
Do you know
to
if
think
like
about.
marriage licenses, do they have him and her, or are they still like just blank names?
Like name one, name
Name
two.
one, name two, something.
I think it's blank. I haven't got my marriage certificate yet
Okay.
because you have to wait until a certain amount of time before the wedding. So
Yeah.
we have had to wait for that. But yeah, it's been an interesting process because you grow up as a young girl thinking about your wedding and all of the things that you want, and you don't really think about like, oh, I actually need to talk to vendors and make sure they know that I'm gay before they come to the wedding so that I don't have a cake that's not going to show up.
Yeah, that's
Right?
awful.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything to say about that.
You probably haven't really thought about weddings too often.
This is like a double not thought of. You know, I haven't thought of weddings or that situation. So.
And it's hard because our culture very like inundates you with heterosexual marriages. So if you go to, let's say, Chapters and you're looking to find some magazines to get some ideas and stuff like that, like you're only going to see hetero magazines. You're never going to see an LGBT magazine. And I was going through these magazines and they maybe had, the good magazines had like one couple. And you're like, yes, I get to see an LGBT wedding. Like, get to see what that would be like.
Are there a lot of differences? Like
Traditions, stuff like that. Like, it's hard because how do you decide what you're gonna wear or something like that? Like, people expect a tux and a dress.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So it's about deciding on things like that.
I'm trying to think back of past weddings. I'm sure there's like a bunch of traditions that typically you would associate with man and women.
I guess I haven't been to weddings actually for that point, so your wedding will be my first.
That's
Which is
very
like really
exciting.
exciting. I mean, I went to one as a kid, but like I didn't really know what was going on, and I didn't get to stay for like the actual party part of it. So
Well, you are also not staying for the party part.
I know the party's the parade.
The party is the parade. We're
The
gonna be
party-
dancing and stuff, but I'm gonna have like a separate reception that's just
That
like
is
family.
fine. I'm looking forward to the party
I
parade
apologize,
part.
you're not invited.
Uninvited.
No, it's the party part that I want to come from. The reception will be lovely.
I have made a playlist for our dance party in the parade. It's very exciting.
That's what I'm looking forward to.
It's been an interesting, I have had so much trouble planning this because of my family being very anti-LGBT.
Are they really?
Yes, I have some
Oh.
very religious family that are actually against gay marriage and
So
has
they
been
won't,
very...
they won't be at the parade.
They will not be at the parade, they will be at the wedding later.
They're still coming to the
Even
reception.
weirder.
Yeah, so here's the deal. My mom is very, very uncomfortable with me having a wedding in the parade. She doesn't want to be in the parade. She doesn't like it. She's actually really unhappy that a lot of my wedding is going to be rainbow. And yeah, so there's been that issue. And so she has really been on my case about having like a little ceremony maybe before the parade, or like, why can't we just do like a ceremony on the ground? Why do we have to do it on a truck? And so I gave in, and I am giving her. Everybody says it to me. It's so frustrating. I want to have a relationship with my mom.
I think it's fine. I feel like it's a good compromise that you guys have come. Like, you're still doing what you want to do. You're still doing like another thing on the side.
Yeah, so we've got a second tiny ceremony just for like family later on before the dinner, where we'll sign the paperwork and everything. It won't be the same. We want our wedding to be the wedding in the parade.
It doesn't take anything away from anything. Right?
The only issue, our guests, a lot of them, it's hard for them to come for a whole day. You're asking them to come to a parade and then a second ceremony and then a dinner. So we have a lot of people who would have come for the parade and maybe like dinner afterwards at like a restaurant, but now are just deciding to come to the second ceremony. So the one ceremony that was most important to us is getting compromised.
And that is.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be at the more important ceremony. So.
You will, yes. You will all
we know
be there.
which one's the more important.
Yeah.
So that has been a challenge for me. And a lot of people are saying like, "Oh, you let her walk all over you, and like you shouldn't have given her that second one." But it's kind of like, what do you do?
Yeah, you're right.
You want to have that relationship with your mother in the future.
Totally.
Listen, it just means now you have multiple parties.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a very long day. Yeah, by the time we get to our second ceremony, we're gonna be sweaty, we're gonna be gross, our makeup's gonna be gone. Like
It'll add to the rainbow effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Colors everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've only been to, I think, 3 or 4 gay weddings. And
You've been to a gay wedding? That is so
yeah,
exciting.
3 or 4 of them.
So only
I've
3 or 4.
I've kind of
You've been
lost
to
count.
3 or 4 gay weddings,
Yeah.
and I've been to one wedding. I mean,
Never been to a wedding.
Yeah, I know exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I've never been
What's
to a
this
gay
in?
wedding.
Weddings are expensive.
Oh, they are.
I mean, we have a parade, but that's a different thing. But I mean, those formal weddings.
Okay.
I mean,
So, was there a big difference for you for those gay weddings and those like hetero weddings, or were you like, this is a wedding, it's great, regardless?
okay, I'll be honest. The gay weddings are much more fabulous.
Okay.
Amen, girl.
I will admit, if I were to rank all the weddings I've been to, the gay ones were at the top. Because I feel like number one, they know how to party. People are like super chillax. Like that's how I would describe it. Very chillax, and it's not very formal and very strict. Like
So less traditional.
Yeah, it's very fluid. People go with the flow, and a couple of the gay weddings were very fabulously decorated, which is expected. But
Can I ask you a question about these weddings? Were they men getting married?
all of the ones I've been to were men.
I know this is a stereotype, but the men have like more fabulous kind of weddings. And I feel like when the women get married, it's much more like budgeted and like let's
Break the
just do
trend.
this.
Yeah. Well, I've been
Yeah.
to a gay wedding that was more budget, but is so budget that walking down the aisle, we were like walking to like some rock song because they were very hetero in quotations. So
I'm gonna be
so
walking-
much so that it didn't even feel like a real wedding because it just felt like 2 guys kind of like crammed together some kind of event.
But I'm going to be walking down the aisle to a
I
pop
know.
song. Is that bad? Should I not be doing that? Okay.
No, that's great. I've definitely seen that happen in
Okay.
pop songs. I've just been to one that was
Guitar
rock
solo.
which was I'm just like, wow, this is very bro.
That's interesting.
So there's different types, and they're all great.
I guess
Like,
it's
I'm
all
having a gay
individual.
Yeah, no, like you have to pick what suits you, right? It suits your personality. I mean, these guys were very, very bro.
Have you been to traditional gay weddings?
Yeah, more like formal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been to more formal ones, but they always transition. It's always like between the ceremony and the first half of reception, it's pretty formal. And then sometime like between 9 and 10, things kind of transition.
I like that. It's like surprise.
well,
The mini bar.
They basically wait until grandma and grandpa go to bed, and then
Okay.
okay, get the rainbows out.
Nice.
Yeah, Yeah, I think gay weddings are better. We know what to do. We know how to party.
Yeah. It just seems more open. People are a little more relaxed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know that Andre Lachance, our humanist officiant in our group, he's going to be officiating my wedding. He kind of mentioned, like, do you have anyone that's coming to the wedding that you think might stand up and say, I am opposed to this wedding?
Really?
That'll make it even more fun, though.
So it put this fear in my head, but I don't think anyone's going to stand up and say they're opposed.
Do you think that's a humanist thing though, or do you think that's like an LGBT thing that he was asking that question? Like,
No,
Well,
probably.
you know what? He kind of said that, like, he has done weddings for people who are religious, and, you know, that question was asked again, like, you know, just to make sure.
So hypothetically, what happens if that happens?
They
Like,
leave.
do we
Screw you.
need like super soakers? Like,
We're just hoping.
Get them
We're
away.
saying, like, please, Grandma, please.
I need a security contingent,
Yeah.
and we need to all bring super soakers.
Okay, that'd be fun. Multicolored dyes in the water.
Yes, just nowhere near me if you're gonna have multicolored dyes in the water, please.
You're colorful enough.
Well, I have some white in my dress, so if you ruin that,
Okay.
you are out.
I won't be invited to the family reception. Wait.
Yeah, so I think that fear is legitimate. I think that's maybe why a lot of gay people elope, is they just don't want to have to deal with it.
what happens when someone objects? Like,
I've
does
never
that ever
encountered
even have a thing? Like, I feel like that's some weird old formality, but like,
It doesn't mean anything. Like, get married anyway.
yeah.
Yeah, I think you just keep going.
Like, why would you?
But it ruins.
Does he
it
ask
ruins
that?
the
Is that
wedding.
part of the ceremony? Does he have to ask? Does anyone object?
Yes, he does. It's legally he has to ask it.
Really?
Yes.
But it doesn't mean anything.
Doesn't really mean anything.
Such a weird thing to still include. I'd be like, legally, take that out.
Yeah, if somebody's shown up and they've sat through that half of your ceremony before getting to that part,
Commitment.
before speaking up, yeah, it's definitely
I'm
commitment.
waiting for my moment. God, here I go.
But it may not just be, it could be like, oh, that person is still married, but why did you sit there that whole time and wait for that?
Honestly, I might just be weird, but like, I would enjoy that. You know? Like, I'd be looking forward to that. I'd be like,
Listen, I'm going to do that at your wedding.
feel free, honestly. Hey, I mean, I want to speak for Selena or whoever else. You know, assuming it'll be Well, I thought they're talking me into a gay wedding, now, so you know, like.
I wasn't talking you into a gay wedding.
No, it's settled. It sounds so much better. Like,
He did look over at me while you guys were talking. He's like, hey, Selena, we're going to have a gay wedding. That sounds great.
you just need some gay wedding planners.
Okay.
So,
That seems a little bit.
That's a good compromise.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Please, I'm not being your wedding planner. That was the most horrible thing I've ever had to go through. I'm not planning another wedding
It'd
ever
be more fun
again.
planning someone else's wedding. You know, you don't have to worry about it.
So you took the lead on your wedding planning.
I did take the lead. Yes, Allie wants very little to do with the planning. It makes her anxious, and she's worried very much about the funds that we have to dedicate to this wedding.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a very low budget wedding. I've tried to do everything I could to kind of nickel and dime. Yeah, we have plastic tablecloths at our family reception, which is great. And
Oh, did you go for those paper ones where you can like draw on them? I was like,
Pencil crayons?
Yeah.
Or
I considered that.
Did you?
Literally considered
Love
it.
that. Okay. I can see that might not fly with everyone, but I'm so glad you considered that.
I
If you
really-
object, write it on a napkin. write yourself an angry letter that you don't send. You know, like
exactly. They can voice their opinion, and you don't have to read it because you just.
Yeah.
multicolored pencil crayon that they have to.
Yeah, I don't think my mom would have liked the paper tablecloths, so I kept it to plastic. That was my compromise, keeping it cheap. So
It's rainbow, right?
No,
Oh.
they're pink. I liked the look of them.
Okay.
Yeah, it went with my decor. So
Okay.
yeah, but I did all the planning. It was tough. I don't recommend it. If you are in a couple, please try and do 50-50. It's awful if you can't.
Just wing it. You know, it's.
I'm regretting not getting eloped. Oh,
It's
yeah.
gonna be so worth it though. It's gonna be so
It will
fun.
be. It will be. And Pride's our favorite day of the year, so we're very excited for this. And I'm gonna cry, so if you're gonna cry, also wear waterproof mascara. You
do.
gotta do that.
Taking notes. Multicolored jockstrap.
Waterproof mascara.
Exactly. Yeah. Super soaker.
Yeah.
Super Soaker. I think we need them. That's a
Yeah.
security
Precaution.
Yes, yes. Especially when we reach that part in the parade where we get to the people who are protesting the
Ooh,
parade.
Especially.
Especially.
They are my favorite, actually.
Are they really?
They are my favorite
It is
because
fun.
I just love it when they have spelling mistakes, grammatical errors in their signs.
It's great.
It's my favorite part.
Oh, the children are here.
It makes me angry, and I hate to give them that pleasure of like making me angry. Just makes me
There's
angry.
usually some really great people though who follow those people with like even more ridiculous signs.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
the counter
Yeah,
protesters.
about like vegetables. I remember one year, and it was like broccoli is a sin or something. And it was like following this guy everywhere he went.
That's
And
great.
like it was really funny, and I think everyone just was like, "Oh, look at that! That's hilarious."
Hey, this guy's sign gets ignored.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's good. I'm glad that people do that.
Yeah.
I'm usually not that close to them that I see that sort of thing. I'm usually walking in the parade or standing to the side, like watching it, so I don't really
Mhm.
follow them. They still make me angry though. Like, why show up? Why bother? We're in 2018 now. Let's get over it. Yeah, so if you're coming to my wedding, come on July 29th. The parade starts at 12:30, so I can't remember last year if we met like an hour early, but show up maybe at least a half hour early just to get there, find out where we are, check your email. We'll be emailing everybody all of the information. Yeah, wear your wonderful colors. Be ready to be festive. If you want to wear a Hala shirt, you can definitely wear one of those.
We have ordered the Hella shirts. Right?
We have Hala shirts if you would like to wear them. People have not requested to buy them yet, so I think that it's going to be limited and who
First
wears
come,
it.
first
But
serve.
yeah. Yeah, so it's very
Okay.
exciting. Come on out and join us.
Excellent.
So after the Pride Parade, we've got a few things going on. On August 26th, we have our next board game night. We're meeting at the Poacher's Arms pub starting at 7:30. Come on out. You don't have to bring anything. They have drinks and food there if you'd like to purchase it. And they have lots of games that they provide to us. And it's a lot of fun. So come on out and join us for that. There is also our next Humanist meeting that is in September, on September 12th. So there is no August meeting. Please don't show up at the library in August. No
Or
one will
July.
be there. Yes. So nobody will be there. Please don't show up in August. Show up in September. We'll come back after our wonderful summer break with lots of tans and a little wedding glow on me. And yeah, so come on out to that as well.
Okay, so before we wrap up, maybe we can give some recommendations on. I know we kind of talked about a few, not too dark, but we kind of fell into a little bit of a dark hole.
I think you have to when you talk
I know.
about these things. We have to talk about
But
struggle.
but let's talk about something maybe more uplifting. But just want to maybe see if anyone has any like recommendations in terms of further readings or information. But basically for me, my recommendation is I watched this movie maybe a couple of months ago called Love, Simon. Okay, it's kind of a high school movie, but I think it's amazing because it's basically a gay kid. He's the star and lead of the entire movie, and it's basically about him coming out in high school and trying to. And he basically starts up an online relationship and conversation with someone from his school. He doesn't know who it is. And the whole movie is basically him trying to find out who this person is. So it's kind of taking all your 80s and 90s kind of high school pop culture movies, but they just kind of change the cast around to be more inclusive, having a gay character, a gay lead, and also having people of color in it as well to kind of create some variety and create some diversity in that movie. So I really liked it because I just thought it was, it's a happy-go-lucky kind of movie, and it kind of shows it's pretty inclusive. So
And it works well for kids as well as adults because I found like even watching it myself, I kind of got that nostalgic feel of like the 90s movies that you were talking about, and it was a lot of fun. It's a really cute movie. A few tears were shed. It's adorable.
yeah, I was in the theater watching it, and it was really weird that I was sitting with my friends who are, around my age, and then we were surrounded by high school girls. And they were all oohing and ahhing. I was like, I feel a little bit out of place. So, but it's not in theaters anymore, so you can watch it in comfort your home without, teenage girls screaming.
I also recommend that movie. It was good. Yeah.
Perfect.
I would separately like to recommend something. So in my research for wedding stuff, I came across the first only lesbian wedding magazine. It's out of Australia, but they do ship worldwide. It's amazing. It's got all lesbian content. It's all women getting married. It's a very beautiful magazine. They just started it within the last few months, so I think they only have
Wow. That's
a
really
couple.
recent.
Yeah, I think they only have a couple. They have 2 volumes out. So there's 2 volumes to go and look at. It's amazing. I think it's great that queer people are getting out there, making their way through this very hetero wedding society and making our mark.
That's
So,
actually really good for Australia because they only recently got marriage equality. It's pretty recent for them. So.
yeah. So the magazine is called Dancing with Her. Yeah. And I think that in their upcoming volumes, they're going to have more weddings from Australia as well because now it's legal. So yeah, a lot more celebration for that.
Cool.
I would also recommend going to the Grand Theater High School project this year. Those projects are always really great, but this year they're doing Prom Date, which is based on, I think, a personal experience. I'm not sure if it's actually a personal experience.
It's based on that high school kid who
Yeah.
wanted to go to prom at a Catholic school.
Yeah, and he wanted to bring his boyfriend, so it's
Yeah.
kind of about that. So it's also great seeing that the community is also kind of embracing that and celebrating that.
Do you know when that's happening?
I know it's always at the very beginning because I know the students work in the summer on that, so I'm assuming it's in the beginning of September.
No worries. I will put it in the show notes. So,
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
So if anything we mention, you can find any links to either the magazine or the show in our show notes. So I think that's it for us. So thanks so much for listening, and check in our next episode. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Like capitalized letters, so it actually says like the gay agenda somehow. No, I'm hungover. Leave it alone.